Cosi Talks live. All right, we got Ronnie Dickson on board from Prosthetic and Orthotic Associates of Tennessee, POA Tennessee. All right, we're going to give you guys a couple minutes to jump on board. Those of you who are watching the replay, believe me, you want to take notes and watch this replay very carefully. We're going to have a lot of information for you guys tonight. But if you are watching the replay, give us a shout out in the comment section, hit replay, say comment, I'm watching the replay, put your questions in, guys. I do go back and I rewatch the shows to see who's putting their questions in there. So if you do have a question and you're watching the replay, put it in the comment section. Don't be shy. All right, guys, as you jump on board, you know the routine. Tell me who you are, where you're from, and what is in your mug. I've got a boring glass of water tonight. Ronnie, I hope you have something a little more interesting.
Yeah, I've got some chai tea going on right now. Just some
All right.
late night caffeine, but not too much,
There you go. And you had a busy day rock climbing today after work, huh?
Yeah.
So you've had a full day. You've earned your supper today. All right, guys. I see some of you guys jumping on board this evening. Don't be shy. Let me know who you are, where you're from, what's in your mug. And guys, just as a reminder, I am broadcasting as well to my YouTube channel. So I know some folks find it a little easier to find me on the YouTube. Hey, Harsh, how are you? Harsh, you need to get an award one of these days. You're always one of the first people to say hello to me every Wednesday evening, and I look forward to it. We got Chuck on board with his iced tea. We got Scott coming in from West Virginia. Gets his new socket next week. Can't wait. That sounds
awesome. New sockets are good.
Yes. Yes. And we're going to be talking about the alignment on those sockets. So, Scott, you're going to want to listen carefully on this one. All right.
Harsh.
Yeah, he's one of my boys from Richmond. We got a nice little crew from Richmond that listens in every week. All right, guys, we've got some numbers ticking up here with the water glass. Okay. Cheers.
Yeah.
To you. Okay, so we've got Marianne. Oh, from South Dakota, Marianne. I'm glad you're here. Emily came back. All right, with her blue raspberry lemonade. That is by far the most interesting drink this evening right now.
All right, perfect.
All right, we got Pastor David on board, so it's a party. He's got his lemonade. All right, we've got Gene. Oh, good. Gene from California. I'm glad you're here, Gene. We've got Drew. We got Phil with Coke Zero. We got a lot of people going on board. Hey, Charlie from New York. All right, guys, I am going to go ahead and get started because we've got a big old group coming already. For those of you joining us for the first time, welcome. My name is Cosi Belloso. I'm a physical therapist, amputee specialist in Tampa, Florida. And with me this evening is Ronnie. I can't figure out where to point. Ronnie Dickson from Prosthetic and Orthotic Associates of Tennessee, and one of the sponsors for our show for this year. So once again, Ronnie, just thank you for your support of this show and for your time and sharing all your expertise with everything that we do.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. The show's a great time. I really love interacting with everybody. We always get great questions. There's a great crew that tunes in, and I'm just excited to be here.
Yes, and we've got a lot of people. Oh, we got Donna from Australia. So I should be saying good morning to you, Donna. All right. Yeah. We've got Felicia from Atlanta. Compadre, as always, good to see you. We've got Susan on board. So guys, this evening is actually, I've never given this talk before. And I was actually telling Ronnie, I'm a little nervous about this because in the 5 years I've done the show, I've never done a talk on alignment. And I think it's long overdue because the response that you guys gave me when I sent out that e-blast was overwhelming. So bear with us tonight, this evening, guys. When it comes to prosthetic alignment, there are books written about prosthetic alignment.
Very large books.
Lots of books written on prosthetic alignment. So we're just going to try to kind of touch the tip of the iceberg with this and hopefully just kind of give you guys a better understanding of what alignment is and what are some of the things that you can look for on yourself with your own prosthetic alignment, and then how you can communicate with your prosthetist and with your physical therapist if you think you're having a problem with your prosthetic alignment. So we got a lot to do this evening. All right, we got we got Asalia on board. That's one of my PT colleagues right there. We got Jerry and Bill on board. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the definition. What does alignment mean? Okay, so the official definition is how your prosthesis is positioned with the socket relative to your body and relative to the other prosthetic components. Okay. So, the higher up you go with your amputation, the more that your prosthetist has to adjust alignment. If you're below the knee, right, they're obviously adjusting the alignment of the foot. If you're in above the knee, we've got the foot and the knee. If you're hip dysartic, then it's foot, knee, and hip, right? And then how it plays in with your anatomical body and your anatomical alignment. So there's a lot of stuff going on. Okay. And you're going to hear us talking about static alignment and dynamic alignment. So basically, the difference is there. With your static alignment, it's what you look like when you're standing still, right? And dynamic is the alignment of what it looks like when you're walking or when you're running or you're doing different activities. And your PT and your prosthetist are constantly assessing this. I don't think I ever stop looking at my patient's alignment the whole time I'm working with them. I don't know about you, Ronnie. I know for you, that's
Oh,
the same.
a lot of times I'll be finished up with somebody and we'll have everything all Loctited, ready to go, and I'll still kind of, I'll start to walk to the back, and then I'll, watch them walk out the office just to make sure that everything looks good. Get one last glimpse at it, and especially on delivery days, on check socket days, we know that we're always going to revisit it, but on a delivery day, we want to make sure that that prosthesis is as well aligned as it can be, because we may not be seeing that person for a little while.
Yep. Yep. And guys, it's always changing. And the thing is, like for me as a physical therapist, I know I look at it through one lens, how I look at alignment, and I know a prosthetist always looks at it through a different lens. And again, reason number 461 why I love working with the prosthetist, because between the two of us and our different perspectives, we're going to hopefully figure out if there's a problem with alignment and where it's coming from. If it's coming from a weakness or a tightness that the person has in their anatomical body, or if it's coming from the socket and something going on with the prosthesis itself. Yeah.
Yeah. Oftentimes prosthetists are very, very quick to look directly at the prosthesis naturally for what can we angle differently, what can we turn differently to get somebody more balanced. And on the physical therapy side, the thought process is so different. It's how can we teach this person to use the device more anatomically? How can we fire the muscles and engage them more effectively to utilize the prosthesis better?
Yeah.
So it's always really a great combo when somebody can work with a good prosthetist and then work with a physical therapist that also knows what they're doing, because that's how you're going to get the best results. It's not just going to happen from one place.
Yep. And guys, we're going to go ahead and kickstart with our first giveaway, because y'all know I love my giveaways and twice on Sunday, right? So the first one, we're going to show Ronnie a lot of love this evening. And the first thing I want you guys to do, sorry, go to his website. So guys, in case you've been living under a rock, right? Ronnie is an amazing prosthetist. He's an above the knee amputee himself. He's a world-class rock climber, amazing human being, an amazing prosthetist. And he owns the clinic in Tennessee, the Prosthetic, Orthotic, and Associates. Many of you are some of his patients that are listening in on board right now. So we're going to go ahead. I'm posting the link to Ronnie's website. Okay. That's the about page. And on that about page, if you scroll down, you're going to see members of Ronnie's team. I want you to name me somebody from his team and put it in the comments section. And we're going to pick somebody at random from those names. All right. So
we got a much bigger team now. The website was updated so long ago. I think we started with 5 people and now we're 11.
Okay. So yeah. You need to update that website.
I should. Yeah. Too busy working with prosthetics to worry about the website.
That's right. You need to get, I tell you, you got to get that website person there. All right. So guys, I'm going to give you like the PT point of view, and then Ronnie's going to talk a little bit about the prosthetics point of view. When I look at my patients, the first thing I do is I assess their alignment. I'm going to check their muscle strength. I'm going to check to see if they've got any tightness in their joints. I'm going to check their balance and all that good stuff. But alignment is the first thing I'm going to check. And what I'm going to use is a handy dandy thing called a plumb line. I don't know if you can see this. It's literally a fishing line and a lead weight that I have attached to the end. Hopefully you can see it a little bit better there. Okay. Now, those of you who are in contracting work, you've probably heard about plumb lines, because this is something that electricians will use. This is something that carpenters will use. This is something that engineers will use. And physical therapists, well, we're kind of engineers of the human body, right? So we will use a plumb line to look at the alignment for our patient. And I have my little mini bob here. Okay. So obviously the plumb line that we used back in school, back in the caveman days, was a lot bigger and a lot longer to accommodate the length of the human body. But basically, we would put it alongside the side of the human body on the side, and we would look at certain landmarks. Pretty simple, but pretty effective. So I'm going to share with you guys now. Oh my gosh, these names are rolling in. Ronnie, I'm going to have you pick a name at random.
Let's go with Emily Degnitz.
Okay, so Emily, you are the first winner, darling, which I am so happy about. She's one of my new viewers. She's been listening for the past month. So I'm so
Very
excited that
cool.
Emily, that you won this. Emily, you're going to win a year subscription to my Cosi Talk Strong Body program. So after the show is over, Emily, I want you to email me. I'm going to put my email down. I want you to email me and my team will email you your login information. Okay. So I'm going to share the screen, guys, and I'm going to show you what it looks like when we're looking at a plumb line. Here we go. So Bob volunteered to take a better picture of himself.
That's a good looking photo of Bob right there.
That's a really great looking photo. I got his good side. All right. So you guys can see the one where he's looking directly at the camera. This one right here. It's called the anterior view. Okay. So when we look at the plumb line, the imaginary, at this point it's an imaginary plumb line, we're looking to have it dissect the human body in half, right? In a perfect world, the plumb line is going to divide that body into right and left halves perfectly, right? But nothing's ever perfect with Mother Nature. So we always start at the top. So I'll look to see at the top, what is the head doing? Is it on straight or is it tilted a little bit off to one side or the other? The shoulders, right? Is there one shoulder that's higher than the other? Is there one shoulder that might be turned a little bit further back? Okay. And then here, this is where, go ahead, Ronnie.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, going with the shoulders, oftentimes we might find that they're level in the standing posture, but then when people walk, that's where we get those muscular imbalances that
Yes.
come into play that the physical therapist can do such a great job treating. Because oftentimes somebody will say, well, my shoulder is dipping a little bit, my prosthesis is short, but that's not the right place to look at it.
Exactly. Exactly. And guys, this is why it really is a head to toe evaluation on an amputee or any of my patients that come in through the door. So we look at the shoulders, right? We look to see like the elbows. I actually look at the elbows here, right? Because this, again, something might be level here, but there might be different compensation. So the elbows, are they level? Is there one arm that's rotated in more than the other? I find this with people who have childhood scoliosis, that they'll be compensating and the arms will not be even. Are the fingertips hanging even, right? So just looking to see where's their unevenness and if I can trace that back to its origin, right? Then moving down to the hips, okay? And this is the part that my patients absolutely love because I have to basically dig my fingers into their sides here and I'm feeling for this part right here. This is called the iliac crest. That's basically the place where your mom would put her hands on her hips when she was scolding you, the iliac crest, right? So we will dig our fingers in there to try to see if they're level. Okay. And then there's other little landmarks right around this part of the front of the pelvis. It's called the ASIS for those of you who want to know. But there are other little landmarks here to let me know, is the pelvis rotated on one side? Is it shifted up or shifted down, right? This is going to give me a lot of information as to what's going on. Okay. Moving down. I love this picture because you can really see all the bony landmarks really nicely. So right here, this part where I'm circling, it's called the greater trochanter. All right. Some people call it the hip dip. The ladies call it the hip dip right here. This is where we stick our hands in as well to see if these are even right here. Okay. The knees. Okay. For those of you who are below the knee amputees, I take a look at the knees, but I also take a look if you're an above the knee amputee. Is the prosthetic knee more or less in line with your anatomical knee? Okay. And then looking down here, especially right here, like for example, I have duck feet. So it looks like my foot is really pronated in and it looks like I have duck feet. In this angle here, I'm looking to see, does the person have, we call, the colloquial term is to say knock-kneed or bow-legged. Okay. So we call
Mhm.
it genuvalgum or genuvarum, right? So these are all the observations that we're making here, looking at the front of the patient. Ronnie, did I miss anything? I'm sure I missed a lot of things because there's a lot.
Yeah, I think you kind of at a bird's eye view got the major things, and it's all really important because now when we are amputated at the different levels, we have certain muscular imbalances that are going to come into play, and that might shift things one way or the other. So it's really important to know at least what that person's starting point is,
Yeah.
to take a proper evaluation of how things have changed, with the amputation. Um, in terms of has anything contracted? Do we have a knee flexion contracture? Do we have a hip flexion contracture? What are some of the things that we're working with here? And taking that into play with the alignment assessment and how we're going to set everything up for that person.
Yep. And guys, this is something that I really value my patients' input. Why? Because you know your bodies better than anybody else. And it's been more than one occasion. Like I've been doing this for 20 years. I've been doing this for a little while, but it's been several times where a patient's come in and they're like, I was getting dressed and I saw myself in the mirror this morning and I noticed this. And it's something that you go, oh, yes. So, guys, this is something that you can do at home, just standing in the square up position, right? And y'all, if you've been watching my show, you need to know what the square up position is by now, right? And gentlemen, just wear your boxer briefs or whatever you wear. Ladies, wear a sports bra and your underwear, and just look at yourself in the mirror in that position, and just kind of just make notice. What are my shoulders doing? Is my head tilted to one side? Okay. The body compensates. The body is amazing at compensating. And those of us who have been alive for more than 2 decades on this earth, our bodies have gotten used to compensating. Okay. So again, you might see something with the shoulder, but where is it coming from? Is it coming from the pelvis? Is it coming from the back? Especially people who have a little bit of a scoliosis in their spine. Pretty much everybody, once they reach the age of 50, they're going to have some form of scoliosis going on, right? Where's that causing compensations? Okay. And is it something that can be reversed? Okay. That's the other thing that I find with alignment is, when I was first a therapist, I wanted to fix everything about the alignment that a person had. But I realized with the years that sometimes these differences in our alignment, they're permanent. So how can we work around it with the prosthetic, adjusting the alignment and strengthening and stretching the structures around it?
Yeah,
So
there's a lot of intentionality that goes into it. I mean, I think even speaking from my own personal experience, um, it does take a lot of checking in with yourself. With my prosthesis, it's very easy for me to just stand on my sound side and not stand on my prosthesis, even though it's perfectly comfortable. It's lined up really well below me, but it's still, my job to make sure that I'm checking in with myself and using it the way that it's supposed to be used. So not getting lazy and just spending too much time on my sound side and making sure that I'm using my prosthesis to its fullest ability so it can help me be the best that I can be.
absolutely. So, guys, we talked a lot about the front view, the anterior view. And by the way, guys, I also look at my patients from behind, and I'm checking a lot of those same landmarks from behind. And again, the pelvis, there's a lot of little bony landmarks on that pelvis that we can trace and just really try to pinpoint where things are coming from. I don't know if they taught you this, but I know in PT school, they always told us check the joint above and the joint below. Right. So if we ever have, like, usually with the patient coming in with a pain in their hip, then they would tell us, okay, make sure you're checking the lower spine, make sure you're checking the knee and even the foot sometimes to see where the origin of that pain is coming from. And the same thing with alignment, guys. If I see like the hips are not even, well, I'm going to be looking at the spine, the lumbar spine, to see if it's coming up from there. And sometimes we can even trace it as far up as the cervical spine, right? Causing some of this misalignment to happen. Right. So
Yeah, and
finding the
anytime we're misaligned, I mean, it's definitely normally going to present itself in the lower back, with typically with some sort of pain or discomfort while standing for long periods of time or after a long day of walking. Um,
Yep.
you're not going to get away too long with that without noticing it.
Exactly. So, guys, let's take a look at the side view. We showed you the front view. Let's look at the side view. Hang on. Let me see if I can make sure I do this. Okay. Okay. So, with the side view, and guys, when I was going through PT school, this was more of a challenge for me because it's very subtle, right? So, when we are born, right? If you guys look at newborn babies, right? They have like this nice curved spine, right? And as they start to develop, the first thing they do is they start to learn to lift their head, right? And that's where you start to see that nice curve in the cervical spine, right? Our spine is not completely straight. This picture puts it a little bit straighter than what it really is, but our spine has curves in it and it's meant to have curves. And these curves go in and out of this line right here. Okay, so we're expecting to see, for example, right here in the back of the rib cage, we're expecting the back of that rib cage to be behind this plumb line. We're expecting that, right? And we're expecting this line to fall a little bit in front of the knee and a little bit in front of the foot, right here in this area. Okay. And it's a little hard to tell, but it also goes a little bit behind the hip joint. And these are really subtle little alignment features, right? But it's amazing where if the alignment is off by a few degrees, how much that can affect your ability to bring the socket forward or your ability to bend your knee. Or the opposite, your knee starts buckling too much, right? And we're going to go over some of those anomalies right there. Okay. So here I'm looking to see, what is the spine doing? Is it overarched? Is it flattened out? A lot of my military guys, because they've been standing at attention and doing all those drills, they flatten out the curve of their spine. And that can also present with some problems there too. Okay. What's going on with the head? Is it sitting too far forward? This is where we can see if there's any contractures in the hip, that hip flexion contracture or knee flexion contracture. Okay. All right. So Ronnie, I don't know if that came through. All right. All right. Did we go? Okay.
Yeah.
So we've had some comments coming in. Let me go ahead and see if I can get this. Emily says, I have spina bifida and had scoliosis as a teenager, so I can only guess what my alignment must look like. And Emily, you're not alone. I mean, everybody's going to have differences and anomalies in their alignment, just again, from being several revolutions around the sun, living on this earth, right? We're working against gravity, and that's what causes the curvatures in our spine. It also is what causes us to have these differences in alignment. Drew says, when you stand up in the square up position, should you put or pull weight on the prosthetic? I know that when I stand and walk, there seems to be more weight on the prosthetic, causing a sinking feeling into the socket. So that's interesting, Drew. Usually it's the opposite. Usually
Yeah.
I have to like yank my patients to put their weight into the prosthesis. So usually what I do in a square up position is saying stand 50-50. Okay. And sometimes for some of you, you might need someone to put you in 50-50. A lot of my patients, when I put them in that square up position and I bring their base of support in and I really make them put 50% of their weight in that prosthesis, they feel like they're completely out of control because they haven't been doing that for so long. So, guys, when you're looking at yourself in the mirror, that's where you might be able to see, oh, wait a second, I really am leaning much more towards my sound side. Ronnie?
Yeah, and I'm thinking in Drew's case too, it's possible that since we're getting more weight into the prosthesis, when he's trying to stand level and getting that sinking feeling, the prosthesis might actually be a little bit short. So he's sinking down into it to try to get that balance that that we're looking for. So that's what it sounds like, among a couple of other things that it could be.
Right. And guys, let's just take a small detour here to talk a little bit about the sinking in the prosthesis, because I hear that's probably the most common alignment issue that I hear about is I feel too short or I feel too long in my prosthesis. Right. So patients will come in and they're like, this prosthesis, it's just too long. I typically hear that more from my AKs. Okay. And I know there's two big culprits to that. Usually it's not the alignment that's a problem. Okay. Usually when I test them to see and I put them in that 50-50, if they feel like they're too long, it's because they've put too many socks on and they've risen out of the socket. Okay. And likewise, if they feel like they're too short in the prosthesis, a lot of times it's because they don't have enough socks on. So that's usually a first troubleshooting cue right there with the person saying, I feel too short or I feel too long in my prosthesis.
Yeah, what I find with my above the knees specifically, I mean, because we are just talking about thigh tissue around one bone, the below the knee tissue is a lot better anchored than the above the knee tissue. So there is some variance. Like I just saw a gentleman that we followed up with this week, one of my police officers, and he came in and he was actually a ½ inch short, but I think that's because he's actually sank further down into his socket. But talking about it more on a macro level in terms of his residual limb has actually shrunk. So he's now sitting further in the socket on a day-to-day basis or on a monthly basis, weekly basis. There is some fluctuation on the day-to-day, but sometimes it does happen on a permanent level.
Yep. And then that's why just constantly monitoring your own alignment, right? And just putting yourself in front of that mirror sometimes and seeing where you are.
And his coworkers were actually the ones that said, hey, it actually looks like you're limping a lot more than you normally do. Is something going on? And that he reached out to our office and made an appointment. It's always the coworkers, the family members, the spouse that, watch that person walk every day. So they know when something's off. I think oftentimes our self-awareness is actually pretty poor, but
Yeah.
with the other people who do pay a lot of attention to us have a lot of information to give.
Yep, because as a person, you're gonna start to compensate, and it's not like a light switch where all of a sudden you sink down like 3 inches in your socket. It's just a gradual progression throughout the day or the weeks that you start to sink
Hmm.
down,
And you
and your
get used
body
to it.
starts to compensate, and you get used to it. So you know that. Rupert, we're glad to have you here. Bonnie says, because I was a professional ballet dancer, my hips are at 15% on a certain test that John hadn't noticed. That is makes sense. Yes. And the test you're probably referring to is called the Thomas test, right? So let's just take a look at that lateral view again. Actually, let me just see if I can make sure I can make it work. Okay. So, guys, when you have the lateral on the side view, anybody with the hip flexion contracture right here, it might look a couple of different ways. The person might actually be overarching in the back to overcompensate, or they might be bent forward, right? So their shoulders and part of this back part of their rib cage is going to be coming forward in front of this plumb line. Okay. So that's what we might be seeing there. Hang on. But yes, that's a very common thing, Bonnie. And again, this is where it's the art and science is figuring out what's coming from the patient's body, what's coming from the prosthetic alignment, and what can we fix and what can't we fix. And we have to compensate, help the patient compensate. So let's see. Let me make sure I didn't miss any other questions there. Okay. So we talked a little bit about the front view. We talked about the lateral view. Um, so let's talk a little bit about what you see when your patients come in as AKs and as BKs, Ronnie. So when your AK comes in, what are some
Yep.
alignment issues that you're automatically looking out for?
Yeah, absolutely. So with the above the knee prosthesis, first off, how I guess before we get straight into the prosthetics, we talked about at the beginning of the show, there's a lot of different things that can contribute to these factors. So the one thing that we're making the assumption kind of when we have all these different conversations here is that the socket is fitting snugly and fitting properly. People could have alignment deviations if the socket's not tight, because then the socket is going to physically move and pivot on them, causing a malalignment, lack of stability. And then also too, if the socket's hurting, Bonnie just kind of hinted at it a little bit. Um, that person's going to not want to spend as much time on it during the gait cycle, leading to a shortened stride, and also sorts of other gait deviations that go along with that. So kind of for our conversations, I'm going to get into things that uh, directly affect prosthetic alignment in terms of the way that things are lined up. But a lot of this is going to be making the assumption that we have a properly fitting socket. So we're not looking to that socket as a cause of the malalignment.
Absolutely. Okay.
Um, but yeah, so then getting into the above the knee amputee, the length of limb is probably the number one factor that's going to contribute to our prosthetic alignment. A knee disarticulation, someone who has a very long residual limb, oftentimes 10 to 14 inches in length, is going to have all of their major muscle groups intact. The adductor magnus, which is the biggest adductor muscle on the inside of the thigh that helps create a lot of stability, a lot of strength, helps anchor that femur, is has not been severed, has not been cut at that level. So at an along above the knee or a knee disarticulation, that person has two things going for them. They have uh, leverage, and then they also have that extra long muscle working for them. So oftentimes what we find in those residual limbs is they're fairly anatomical. The residual limb is going to have a slight amount of adduction to it or inwards pitch. And then oftentimes, because the muscles are more balanced, we don't have major flexion contractures to work with. So that leg is going to have the ability to be more straight up and down, um, you know, and everything. Now, using the polar opposite example, if we're talking about a short residual limb, maybe someone who only has 4 or 6 inches of femur, all of the major adductor muscles at that point have been severed or cut. And that residual limb, this is perfect that you're pulling out the skeleton here, but now we'll kind of sit in the flexed position. So it's going to be angled forward. And also it's going to be abducted. It's going to be angled out because that femur doesn't have a good anchor. The flexors are now the most powerful muscle that's attached to it. So they're going to pull it forward and then it's going to float out,
Right.
which makes it difficult then to, uh, you can do some physical therapy for that, but prosthetic alignment is going to be important because there are things that we can do to compensate for some of those imbalances and make sure that that person feels balanced with the way that the prosthesis is under their body. And even in the knee disarticulation example, that can present still so many different ways where, I need to be in tune with what the general is. How does this normally present? And how am I treating this 9 out of 10 times? But there's always going to be somebody who doesn't fit that mold, who I need to align how their body's telling me to align it, and not how I would normally align that.
Right. And guys, I'm going to jump in because I got to put my PT 2 cents into there, right? This is where early intervention physical therapy is so, so important. And I'm talking about early intervention of person's waking up from the OR, early intervention, and they're seeing the physical therapist, okay? Because we start with positioning that limb because of the fact that we know that those contractures can happen and that tightness can happen so quickly. So just even teaching the nursing staff, teaching the patient family, how to position that limb in the bed and how to get that limb moving to help prevent some of this tightness from setting in. And again, you're working, it's all lever arms, right? So like Ronnie said, those inner thigh muscles, those inner groin muscles are no longer there, or they're very, very short. So all the muscles back here in the butt, the glute max, the glute medius, they're all pulling back and they're pulling that limb into that position, right? So you've got to just keep working that limb to prevent the tightness from setting in and also just strengthening everything around it. Okay.
And
So
it cascades all the way up too. So
Mhm.
the way that'll present is now that person will have a more pronounced shoulder lean. We call that a Trendelenburg gait pattern. If
Yep.
you look it up in the textbooks. And now after walking with that shoulder lean for a period of time, those muscles will have shortened, in the abdominals and going up through the chest. And without really good training, those will start to just learn how to be that way and be in that position. So it takes a good therapist to isolate, these are some, this is how this is affecting the whole connective chain, and this is how we can fix that.
Yep. And here we go. Hang on. There's a question here. There's a comment.
Yeah, I've got a few questions.
Mhm.
Does this pertain to bilateral too? Yes, it does, because what we're talking about is we're going to be talking about some alignment things that in a unilateral sense, but then this carries over to both legs that the individual has. So, but on a bilateral, there might be some small things that I might do differently to help give that person a wider base of support or better balance over the prosthetic feet. But for the most part, all of these principles are true for bilateral.
Yep.
Another one I got here, stump on the left below the knee amp is only 7 3/4 inches. I think that's a lot of my balance issues. I know a lot of BKs. 7 3/4 is a really
That's not
great
bad.
residual limb. I mean, the majority are actually in between
Yeah.
6 and 8. That's a mid-length to long-length residual limb. That's great. I mean, that's
Yeah.
definitely a good amount to work with there.
Yep.
Depending on how tall you are, that actually might be too much. But you know, uh, that's a different conversation there. Um, and
And then one
yeah.
comment I wanted to make going back to the bilateral and unilateral as well, guys. I'm looking a lot at the sound limb because the sound limb is going to do some compensating. Okay. So if, for example, the person is not trusting their prosthesis and they're leaning on their sound limb, but their sound limb is also not as strong as it should be, they might be putting their knee in hyperextension, meaning extending it too far and locking their knee basically too much, right? And causing abuse on that side. So we're looking at alignment on both the sound side and the prosthetic side as well. So that's something we're
Yeah.
always kind of keeping in mind there as well.
There's a lot to cover. I mean, really, the number one thing that we see with alignment on the sound side that happens is maybe somebody's been sitting for a while, or maybe they've been on crutches, and the anterior tibialis muscle gets really weak. So when we go to heel strike, we don't get a smooth rollover into the foot. It just goes immediately to foot flat. It like slaps. And that just starts to, we've got to take a good step on the sound side to be able to take a proper step with the prosthesis. So the sound side oftentimes does contribute to some of our gait deviations. So we want to make sure that that's strong, and that's definitely something that we're looking at.
We got our answer there. Scott is 6 feet 8 inches. So there's our perspective there. But I'll tell you what, Scott, I've had some below the knee amputees that they are practically a knee disarticulation, that they have very, 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 very short residual limb. But one of the prosthetists I'm thinking of here, one of my favorite ones to work with here in St. Pete, he's brilliant at getting good suspension and getting a really good fit. So I think, again, your balance, yes, that's something definitely to think about, especially being at 6 feet 8 inch tall. Yes, you're going to have to work a little bit more on balance exercises, but also making sure you have a good socket fit, making sure you have good suspension so that you feel secure in wearing that leg.
Yeah, Scott, I'm going to say, at 6 foot 8 inches, you definitely win that conversation. 7 inches is no longer a long residual limb when you're 6 foot 8. But that being said, it's all about getting it lined up properly underneath you. And between having a properly fitting socket that supports you well, and then getting that prosthetic foot right where it needs to be, inside and out, and then front to back, makes a really, really big deal of how you feel on that foot.
Yep. And Rupert says, OMG, I wish somebody would have told me this when I left the hospital. Honestly, Rupert, nothing is set in stone. Okay. There's always work that can be done. And again, guys, this is where I encourage you tonight before you go to bed, stand in front of the mirror. See what you see. Let's see what you see. Start looking at from the top of your head down to your toes and just see, okay, just start getting to know your body and just saying, okay, I see a little bit of a difference here in alignment, or I see a little bit of a difference there. What does that mean? Does it mean anything or not? Is that something that can be worked on or not? Take it to your physical therapist and prosthetist and just see what they have to say. Okay.
All right. And probably the next thing is, so for the above the knee, I mean, we've kind of hinted at it a little bit, but the number one test that we will do at the very beginning is the Thomas test, which you talked about earlier. And essentially we're trying to see how much, well, I guess what you could say is where the femur feels comfortable being positioned. And we're talking about it from the front, from the side. So if you don't mind grabbing the skeleton again.
Yes. Okay.
Yes. So this is perfect. The leg that's closest to you is angled a little bit more forwards. And so
typically what we do is we take the leg that you're testing. We'll say this is the leg we're testing. I'll take the other leg and I'll put it knee to chest. Obviously, Bob is very flexible, but that basically takes the slack off the lower spine, right? So I can really isolate that muscle that causes hip flexor tightness. It's called the psoas muscle, okay? And then we just drop the leg and just see, is the leg hanging up here and it won't relax all the way down to the mat? Or is the person able to lay their limb completely flat? Or in some cases, even bring it down just a little bit if they have really nice flexibility and a nice pliable psoas muscle, okay? So we'll bring, and you guys, this is something you can do in your bed tonight, right? Bring your sound limb knee to chest as comfortable as you can. You don't have to put it up as high as Bob. He's just showing off, right? And just see what happens to your residual limb. Do you feel tightness in the front part of your hip when you try to push it down flat on your bed? Does your leg sit up high? Okay. And again, are you feeling the pull in the back of your spine? That's indications that you have hip flexor tightness. And a lot of people get freaked out. They're like, oh my gosh, I have hip flexor tightness. Guys, lots of people have hip flexor tightness. I've got hip flexor tightness. The question is whether or not it's going to interfere with the fit of your prosthesis and whether it's going to interfere with your gait. The example of Bonnie, my ballerina there, this is something that you've obviously had for quite some time. So this is probably something that you've been working with. My patients will often come in with a hip flexion, contracture, or tightness, and I'll evaluate it to see, okay, we've got some wiggle room here that we can work some of this out, or nope, this one's really, really tight and we need to work with the prosthetist and the alignment to see how we can help you compensate for it.
Yeah, and this is a really important place where the prosthetist has to have a really good understanding of how that person's residual limb is working. So, um, where am I even going to start here? So specifically, I was telling Kosi the story this week of me. You know, I'm an active 35-year-old. You know, I do yoga a couple times a week. I do some stretching, and I still have a hip flexion contracture. I still have a little bit of one. So that has to be accommodated for in my socket so that when I'm walking through my gait, it doesn't start to throw some of that excess pressure into my low back. As we go through the gait cycle. So I have to have some flexion in my socket to keep my low back healthy. Now, I have a friend who we made a prosthesis for, and we were having so much trouble getting his alignment because he always felt like the knee was bending or the knee was flexing on him. And what we found out is that he was actually had a very, very flexible hip joint.
Mhm.
So he actually was able to bring his leg back in a position that most people can't get to. And that was his baseline. That was his starting point.
Yep.
So we had to align his prosthesis back in hyperextension to get his prosthetic knee to work properly and get him comfortable. And that didn't bother him at all. That's just where he wanted to be. And that would kill me. That would certainly be very bothersome to somebody else. I
Yeah.
mean, we just wouldn't be able to walk that way, but everybody's alignment is completely
It is
100% different.
so completely different. And if I had to pick one aspect of what is the most challenging thing from a clinical standpoint of treating an amputee, for me, it's alignment. For me, it's about pinpointing what am I seeing? Where is it coming from? Right. And can I fix it or do we have to work around it? So it's something that it's that puzzle that you're always trying to fix.
Yeah, and
Um,
then prosthetically, what that means, if we were going to oversimplify this, someone that has a flexed residual limb, eh, we're going to have to actually physically move that knee joint further back so that the knee can be stable. You know, somebody like me, it's just going to be a little bit back because I have some flexion contracture, but not a lot. And then somebody like the gentleman we were talking about, um, his knee is going to be basically able to be directly underneath his socket because we don't have to move that back at all. If anything, it actually needs to be a little bit forward.
Yep. And Jean, this is a very good question. Jean asked, I'm short, 5 foot. I do have a long residual limb, but not disarticulation. Are you saying I could build the inner thigh muscles? I'm flabby, but limb lays flat. So yes, Jean, for me, even with the residual limb, you know, the exercises I give my patients, it's meant to work all of the leg muscles. We'll do individual muscle groups, but then a lot of the exercises I do with the person in standing and in the parallel bars, it's meant to work all of the muscle groups together. So if there's even just a little bit of muscle contraction going on in those residual muscle, we're going to make it work. Yes. And
So
go ahead.
oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, now's a great time to maybe bring up some of those photos from the alignment machine.
Yes. Hang on one second before you do. Hang on. Harsh said, is this applicable to below the knee? Yes, Harsh. If you're referring to that Thomas test, yes. And actually, that's a test that I'll do on myself. So when you lay down, Harsh, and you bring your sound knee to your chest, you'll know if you're tight, if your residual limb starts to go up. If you can bend your knee comfortably back, that means you've got some pretty good flexibility. But it's the same kind of a test. You lay your limb flat on the bed or try to, and if you feel that tightness in the front part of the hip, then that'll tell you if you've got that hip flexor tightness. All right, so Ronnie, let me share the screen. Let's do this one. Okay. Is that good?
All right, perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, and you know, so let me get into the full screen here. Yeah, so just wanted to kind of show off the example of in this check socket, which is the residual limb that's closest to us, we have an alignment plate on that. So that plate actually has 32 different hole positions that we can move that prosthetic foot to. We can move it in 1/4 inch increments to the inside, to the outside, front to back, for a total of 3/4 inches of movement in any direction. And so that really gives us a lot of variability and adjustability. We do these plates on our above the knees. We do these plates on our below the knees. so that our we can optimize the prosthetic alignment. So here with this bilateral amputee, things that we might be looking for is I'm looking for how the weight line falls through his foot. So this gentleman is on a force plate, and there's a red laser line that's being shot up the side of his body.
Right here. You can
I'm
barely
hoping
see it
that
right here.
laser line, yep, bisects his foot into front and back halves. Ultimately, we can see how that's tracking up through the knee, how that's tracking up through the hip. Just at surface level, I'm making sure that his feet are even. So I'm asking him to position himself just without looking at his feet, but just kind of where he feels natural and comfortable. And then I'm working with that to try to essentially even his body out. The great thing about this laser line is it's actually able to give us data in form of a number of how far in front of the pylon that laser is. And then we can actually use that on the other side to help create symmetry so we don't have one leg that's walking really heel heavy and then another leg that's walking really toe heavy. We can use our data to dial both of those in and make them balanced and even. And last but not least, with our bilaterals, we are trying to keep that weight. We don't want that person ever falling backwards because it's very, very hard to recover your balance when you're falling
Yeah.
backwards. We would prefer that that person be pitched forwards just a little bit where they get the great support of that prosthetic toe.
Okay. So guys, basically with that device, if this is the caveman's version of the plumb line, that's the more advanced version. You know which one I use, right? I'm the caveman. Guys, we're going to pause for just a moment. I want you guys to help me show Ronnie some love and thanks and gratitude for continuing to support the Cosi Talks show. So up there, I put the handle, his Instagram handle for his clinic, POA Tennessee. All right. I want you guys to go visit his Instagram page. There's a very interesting picture of me, and I want you to tell me what it is that I'm holding. And while you're there, follow him. So follow the POA page and then tell me what is it that I'm holding in the picture and put it in the comments section and we're going to pick another winner. Okay? So Ronnie, I'm going to go ahead and share that other picture that you presented.
Yes. Because that was just a BK example. I think on this
Right.
next one, we'll be able to talk a little bit how it relates to the AK.
There we go.
Perfect. So this is a little bit more updated, more advanced version of the laser posture. We actually use both in our office. The simple version I'll just use in our static gait alignments in the parallel bars. And then on this, I can actually, it takes this data with cameras that are actually mounted to the wall. So then we can actually transpose this on the TV screen that you see in the background. And it gives me a lot of the same info. I mean, honestly, it gives me the same info that the other one's giving me in just a more detailed way, and in certainly a way that's easier for me to present to the patient. But we're looking at her leg, and when we look at it from the side, almost like we were with the below the knee prosthesis that we saw in the last photo, the number one thing with the above the knee prosthesis is we want to make sure that that weight line is anterior to the knee joint or in front of the knee joint, because that's going to create stability. So do we have the proper flexion angle while standing? And is that line, is the weight line in front of the knee? Because then that person should be able to stand comfortably without having to worry about their knee buckling and everything. If the weight line is posterior to the knee, that will often create the feeling of, why is my knee flexing when I don't want it to? That'll create a lot of voluntary, having to pull it back and try to keep it stable. Whereas here, you should, there's a fine line too. The weight line can sometimes get too far in front of knee center, in which case it's hard to actually bend the prosthesis, but there is that sweet spot in between that we're trying to be, and that's different for everybody.
Absolutely. All right. I'm going to stop the screen. Okay. We're getting a lot of comments coming in. So Van Gregory, I'm glad you mentioned this because this is actually one of the things we're going to be going over. So Van Gregory was saying, I'm getting pushed backwards by my feet when standing, so I had an adjustment to fix it. Worked wonders, makes a world of difference with toe rollover when walking. Now that I'm learning to run, that adjustment makes for too soft an energy return off toe when I attempt to jog, and I'm going back for final sockets next week to see if I can get a sweet spot adjustment. And yes, you really hit the nail on the head, Van Gregory. The pushing backwards sensation, that is an alignment problem. And then, yes, things change when you start running, and your alignment also has to change when you are a runner. And that's something that I'm personally still learning about with my own runners, to see like how we have to change alignment, especially when you start using a running blade. But that's a show we're going to have to do.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, absolutely.
Guys, those of you who don't have Instagram, have no fear. We have a Facebook giveaway coming up as well. And we're going to pick a winner here. We've got Jean. Jean, you are going to be our winner. Yes, I am in the picture and I am holding this, which is my plumb line. So Tom, fishing weight and fishing line. Yes, that's technically what this is, right? You're right. I went into my dad's tackle
Got
box
called
and I pulled
out.
out the fishing lead line there, but that's exactly what a plumb line is, guys. And you know, when cavemen walked the earth and I was in PT school, that's how we did our alignment. That's how we were taught alignment. And when I look at my patient, I don't have that really cool machine that Ronnie has. I wish I did because it's really, really cool. But I'm looking at that and I'm visualizing that plumb line. And that's kind of what we're using. So yes, some of
She
your
shoots laser beams out of her
I
eyes, is what she just
know.
said.
I wish that'd be super cool, wouldn't it? Yeah, it'd scare my kids even more. No, I'm kidding. All right. So, Jean, congratulations. Jean, send me an email after the show and I'll be sure to connect you and have you with a strong body subscription as well. Okay. So we've talked about stuff that alignment with the above the knees. We've talked about alignment with, well, we didn't talk too much about the alignment with the below the knee. So let's talk a little bit, a couple of details there with the
Let's do
alignment.
it.
So I know obviously the big one is that you have a knee that you're working with. And with that comes the potential for a knee flexion contracture. And that's probably one of the most common alignment issues that you might run into with a below the knee amputee. So what are some of the other things that you might be looking at, Ronnie?
Yeah, the knee flexion contracture is the biggest one. You know, length of limb, it can, certainly be a factor. I'm going to throw a different one out here. I'm going to say tissue profile,
Oh,
can also, play a factor in some of the below the knee alignment. I mean, we can only get so much compression with our socket. So if someone has softer, more squishy residual limb,
mhm.
there might be some extra movement in the socket that we have to accommodate for, as opposed to someone who has a firm residual limb. So I've definitely seen different variations of that with the below the knee. The length of the residual limb, I mean, most of them that we're seeing are medium to long. I mean, the short residual limbs do exist, and those are certainly 100% treatable. But I think, a lot of times, not seeing too many residual limbs that are under 4 inches, and most of them are in that 6 to 8 range, which is a nice sweet spot.
There you go. Okay. So let's talk a little
Um,
bit about, okay, so I'm like, I feel like we're all over the place, but we've got so much good
That's
information that
so
we're
much to
giving here
cover.
tonight.
Yeah.
I know, I know. So guys, we talked about in the beginning of the show, the difference between static and dynamic alignment. Obviously a lot of what we've been talking about this evening is the static alignment. And for the purposes of this show, I kind of want you guys to kind of focus a little bit more on the static, because that's something that you can kind of start to take a look at, like I said, in front of the bathroom mirror this evening before you go to bed. With dynamic, as the body starts moving, oh my gosh, everything changes, right? And we have incredibly sophisticated equipment that will stop every split second to measure just the different angles and the way gravity affects the body at these different angles. For those of us who don't have that really wicked sophisticated technology, we just have our iPhones, which let me tell you, these things come in really handy with the slow mo,
Oh
right?
yeah.
So a lot of times where I'm just scratching my head looking at a patient going, not sure what I'm seeing there in that gait pattern, not sure what's going on. I'll capture their gait pattern with the slow mo where I can just slow it down frame by frame and just drop that imaginary plumb line and just see what is going on with each point of the gait cycle. Right. And again, that's like for a whole encyclopedia worth of books right there. So,
Oh yeah. I mean, the biggest things that we're looking for is, do we have a vertical, a straight up and down pylon? at a point called mid stance. And mid stance is when we're at the very middle of our gait cycle,
Yep.
when the sound foot meets the prosthetic foot in space, essentially, in the air as it's swinging through. So when we're looking at that from the front to back, so when we see someone walking towards us or walking away from us, we want to get a good shift onto the prosthesis. We don't want them toppling over the prosthesis.
Right.
We don't want it kicked out like a kickstand. We want them that underneath them at a very, very specific point. And we can slow that down frame by frame to kind of see how that's happening. Sometimes what we might have to do is we might have to outset the foot to give that person a wider base of support. Or if the foot's too far out and we see it swinging in and then coming back out, then sometimes we might actually have to inset that foot to get it in the right place for the person. That's the awesome thing about these alignment plates, is that we can capture that in our check socket right where it needs to be. And then when we go to the definitive socket, we don't have to have all the 15 different adapters on there to get it into the right spot. If you did that, you just didn't do something right with your check socket. That's just the truth. And it makes me want to bang my head against the wall. Anyways,
Yeah.
that's a different story.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
from the side, what we're looking for too is we're looking for a, not too soft of a heel strike, but also not too firm of one either, that it immediately kicks the knee forward. Then once we get to the mid stance, we want that pylon completely straight up and down, because what that means is if that pylon's facing backwards when we get to mid stance, that person's having to fight to get over the foot, that person is not going to advance over it as quickly as they should, throwing off the timing of the gait pattern. And then if we have an anterior leaning pylon, if that's leaning forward during mid stance, while we're looking at it from the side, they're getting through the foot too quickly, probably crashing back into their sound side. And then that whole cycle is just going to repeat itself all over again. There's just not any balance happening there.
Yep. So, Beth, have we talked about the heel to toe ratio as it pertains to shoes? Not yet, but we're going to give a little bit more of that right now in this next section. Okay. So guys, I have a book sitting here in my library of all the different gait deviations, meaning all the different ways that a person walking can go wrong, right? And whether it comes from the person or the prosthesis, I have an entire book. For the sake of this show, we're just going to pick out like two of the more common ones that I hear people saying a lot. All right. So the first one is I feel like some of my patients will come in and they say, I feel like I'm walking downhill. Right? I feel like my knee is constantly going to buckle. And I just even though I'm walking straight, I feel like I'm walking downhill. And my patients are like, why? I don't know if I'm going crazy. It's like, no, you're not going crazy. It means there's something going on there. Right? So from the prosthetic standpoint, okay, well, basically what it means is that when your foot hits the ground, your knee just starts to bend too much, right? And it starts to feel like it's going to buckle, right? Now, this can be caused by the suspension of the prosthesis if the prosthesis is not attached firmly enough to the body, right? If the prosthetic foot is set in too much dorsiflexion, meaning the toes are pointing up too much, okay? The stiff heel, what Ronnie mentioned earlier, when your heel hits the ground, if that heel is too stiff and your toes can't go flat, right? That's going to contribute to that feeling right there. Okay. And then the other part of it, and Beth, this might be related to your question, is if the foot is set too far back.
Oh yeah.
Right. So let me just call up that picture because I want you guys to really kind of visualize this. Sometimes even for me, I have to be like, okay, I need to really see the picture to see this. Let's go back to Bob. Right. So you see, let's look at the lateral view, the side view. Okay. If this foot is set too far back, right? That knee is going to come forward and boop, it's going to buckle on you. All right. So if it goes too far back, it's going to buckle on you. Okay.
And
go ahead.
Talking specifically with Beth on the heel to toe ratio as it pertains to shoes, the number one thing that I do when we're aligning any prosthesis is first thing we do is we get it right for the shoes. So when the prosthesis is off and you can see the prosthetic foot in the shoe and it's in front of you, is that pylon straight up and down? Is it pitched backwards? Is it pitched forwards? Because that's not happening from how the person's wearing it. That's normally coming from the angulation of the shoe. Does it have a heel or does it have no heel, and is it pitched backwards? And I'm just looking for that relationship to be neutral. So I just want that pylon to be straight up and down when the prosthesis is off of you, and so that you can see that it's even in the shoe. Sometimes what you can do is you can take it and you can kind of just roll it back and forth, and you ask yourself, is there a sticking point, or does that feel like a smooth roll, coupled with visually seeing that that pylon is straight up and down, and that's how you know it's aligned properly for shoes.
Okay. Let's see. Felicia says, Ronnie, what do you do if the prosthesis is too long or the person is too short? So again, go ahead, Ronnie.
One thing that you could do if your prosthesis is too long right now is you could take the insole out of your shoe, and that's just it's going to be such a that's one thing that you could do, and it'll make it a tiny bit better right now. But otherwise, that'll definitely have to be shortened or adjusted, at the prosthetist office.
Yeah. And Felicia, there's times where I remember there was this when I was working at Jackson Memorial Hospital, and I was really into checking the length of the prosthesis. I would sometimes call the prosthetist in for like an eighth of an inch, and his name was Steve, and he's like, "Really, an eighth of an inch?" And I'm like, "Steve, just humor me, and adjust it to make it." And sometimes it would work, and the patient was very sensitive to those differences in length, and sometimes it was not necessarily the cause. But definitely, Felicia, the height of your prosthesis is something that you can start evaluating on yourself. And again, too many socks, too little socks. Are you sinking too much into it because you're having those changes in your residual limb over time, right? Van Gregory says, wow, listening to you and Ronnie talk about alignment, I have a newfound respect for what you guys have to know and get this aligned properly. No, and let me tell you something, Van Gregory. This is for me where I'm still learning, and this is something I think I will continue to be learning until I hang up my gait belt at retirement. Let's see. What if you think your foot with the prosthesis is leaning to the outside? Okay, so your prosthesis is set too far out. And again, Ronnie mentioned that earlier, that it could have been done on purpose to give you a little bit more base of support. Or
Well, and the way I interpret her question is I wonder if it's maybe too far in, so then that way she feels like it's leaning to the
okay,
outside.
nope, I
Um,
see what you mean.
it's hard to say without seeing it, but
Yeah.
I would back over to the prosthetist and just say exactly that. This is what I'm feeling. Is there a way that you can help me with this? Oftentimes, yeah, that is going to come from some form of the alignment. Now we're looking at the side to side view, but how is
Right.
that ankle pitched? I like my neutral personally, and I like to do all my alignment up at the socket so that I'm just getting one clean line on how that foot is being adjusted. But some prosthetists do invert and evert the foot. Um, and so there could be some adjustments that might be made to be able to help that, or everything could be too far inset, meaning that it's too far underneath of you, and we need to move it out so that it's under your hips the proper way.
I'm wondering if there's a little genuvarum. I'm trying to visualize in my brain what it's going to look like.
It could be so
Yeah.
many things.
It's so many things. It's like, this is where it's like, Gene, we're going to get way too into the weeds right here. But it's, again, something to bring up to your processes. And guys, there are certain key phrases like the one that Gene said, where I'm just like, yeah, that's an alignment thing. That sounds like it's coming from an alignment, versus
Yeah.
other phrases where you're just like, is that alignment or is that the individual? Anyways, before we go with the next one, guys, those of you who are not my Instagram folks, here is your Facebook giveaway, guys. Okay, so go to Ronnie's Facebook page, follow it, please. And then also that first post, right? He posted the pictures of that really cool device that he uses to look at alignment, the laser one. I need something with lasers. All right, what is the name of that device? He put the name of it in the title of that post. So put that in the comments section and we're going to pick a winner. All right. So let's talk about the next thing, that the opposite. So we talked about what happens when you feel like you're walking downhill, but what about those of you who say, I feel like I'm walking uphill. I'm having to like fight to break this knee, right? So what happens there is when your heel hits the floor, Instead of your knee buckling, it's the opposite. You can't get your knee to bend and you can't move and roll over forward onto that foot. Okay. So, a couple of things that might be coming from the alignment are your foot is set in too much plantar flexion, meaning the toes are pointing a little too much down. Okay. And then the opposite of what we just discovered is that the foot is set too far forward, right? So instead of being set like where it's nice and even, it's like too far forward in the socket. Okay. And those are some of the prosthetic issues. In terms of what could be coming from the patient, if you have weak quads, if you're hanging on your ligaments, right? Because your muscles are weak, so you snap that knee back into too much extension and you can't move forward because you have weakness in those muscles. All right, Ronnie, your turn.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think that covered like the main things. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else from the walking uphill. I mean, on the above the knee standpoint, a flexion is what helps us engage that knee. So if there's too much extension in that, we're probably going to have some low back pain at that point. And also too, it's going to be very difficult to get through that knee and to actually bend it. And also too, the prosthesis being too tall is going to create a tremendous amount of energy expenditure in the above the knee amputees. Being too tall is very difficult to contend with.
Yep. All right, guys. And we've picked our next winner. Congratulations, Rupert. I'm writing your name down so we don't forget. So Rupert, email me after the show is over. And I'll put my email down. All right. And you just won yourself a year subscription to the Cosi Talks Strong Body program. So you can start working out some of those, the weakness or any tightness that you might have going on, Rupert, because I do have a lot of good stretching exercises there. All right. Awesome. Okay. Sorry, guys. I'm writing these notes down because I want to make sure I don't forget about our winners. Okay. Holy smokes, Ronnie. We covered like a lot.
Covered a ton of stuff.
We covered a ton of stuff. And guys, as you can tell from just listening in on the show, there's a lot that goes into alignment. A lot that goes into alignment. To me, it's a very fascinating part of watching an amputee and just seeing, okay, what's going on there and how to put this puzzle together. But there is a lot going on there. Guys, if there's one takeaway, okay, 2 homework assignments that you have this evening. Okay. Number 1, before you go to bed, okay, get down into your skivvies and your sports bra for our ladies, right? And look in the mirror and just stand in that position that you saw Bob standing in, right? Hang on. We're going to throw Bob up there just one more time. Got to make sure he's earning his royalty check on purpose. All right. All right. So just stand in this position and just see, what is your head position looking like? What do your shoulders look like? Your hips, your knees, and then finally your feet. What does it look like? Okay. All right. Second homework assignment is, if you feel like you're having a limp, you're walking with a limp or a gait deviation, explain what it feels like to your prosthetist or your physical therapist. And you don't have to try to figure out the fancy words. Just say, I feel like I'm walking downhill. I feel like I'm walking uphill. I feel like I'm lurching to one side, right? Explain this to your physical therapist and your prosthetist.
Sometimes it's even super simple. It feels better when I put my foot here and move it out, move it forwards, move it back. And that's a really, really great way to get started, and in a way that they can certainly understand.
Yes. Okay. And just communication right there. Yeah. All right. I am talked out, and that does not happen very often.
Wow. So, finally happened.
Finally got a Cuban to be tired.
Everybody deserves to be balanced on their prosthesis. It is possible. A good static alignment will generally lead to a good dynamic alignment, although sometimes there are other things that come up. But I would just, when we're looking in the mirror, like Cosi recommended, just, feel where you feel balanced, shift that around, start tuning in to how you feel on your prosthesis. And let's work on making that 5% better, whether that's asking somebody else for help with the adjustments, e.g. your prosthetist, or heading to a therapist to maybe work on some exercises that are going to help strengthen and tone everything.
There we go. All right, guys, we are going to wrap it up for this evening. Ronnie, I cannot thank you enough for doing this talk because I would not have been able to do this one by myself. So I really appreciate all of your expertise and again, all your continued support of the Cosi Talk Show. Very much appreciated. Guys, show Ronnie some love. Go to the Instagram page if you're on Instagram. Go to the Facebook page if you're on Facebook
Thank
and
y'all.
hit follow. Show my sponsors your gratitude and your support. Guys, this next week, what is next week? Holy smokes, it's the 26th. All right, general Q&A. So it's open season on the PT next week, guys. As always, thank you for letting us be a part of your lives this evening. And we will see you guys, same bat time, same bat channel next week.